I am holding the invoice for a custom hand-carved ice sculpture of two swans intertwining necks. It cost $3,500. It is currently melting onto the expensive parquet floor of the country club, creating a widening puddle that reflects the flashing red and blue lights pulsing through the bay windows. That puddle used to be my white blood cell count. It used to be the copay for the port in my chest. But right now, it's just warm water ruining a rented floor. If you want to know how a block of frozen water became the evidence that dismantled my entire family tree and left my brother crying in a tuxedo, stay with me until the end. My name is Elena. I'm 29 years old, a mid-level graphic designer, and until about 3 hours ago, I was the selfish daughter who wouldn't stop dying long enough for her brother to cut a cake. Let's just say the reception didn't go as planned. I mean, usually when the doors swing open during the best man's speech, people expect a drunken uncle or maybe a late caterer. They don't expect the sheriff and a court-appointed asset seizure team. The silence in that room was heavy, almost like a physical weight pressing down on the 300 guests. You could hear the ice sculpture dripping. Drip, drip, drip. It was the only sound in the world as my mother looked from the sheriff to me, her face going from that practiced pageant mom smile to this hollow gray mask of absolute terror. She knew. In that split second, she knew that I knew. I took a sip of my water. Tap. Not sparkling, because apparently, we were on a budget. And I just watched. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel guilty. Honestly, for the first time in 6 months, I just felt clean. But to understand why I burnt the venue down, metaphorically speaking, of course, you have to understand the architecture of my family. See, in our house there was a hierarchy that was etched in stone before I was even born. At the top sat Tyler. Tyler is 32, unemployed, and entirely convinced that he is a temporarily embarrassed billionaire. He's the golden child, the sun, the moon, and the stars. If Tyler failed a math test, it was because the teacher was jealous of his creative potential. If Tyler got fired for showing up late, it was because the corporate structure couldn't handle a visionary. And then there was me, the scapegoat, the insurance policy, the one who got good grades, or got a steady job, and paid her own bills so my parents could focus all their emotional and financial resources on propping up Tyler's fragile ego. I was the furniture, necessary, reliable, and completely invisible unless I broke. And here's the thing about being the invisible child. You get used to the silence. You get used to the fact that your achievements are greeted with a nod, while your brother's participation trophies are framed in the hallway. I accepted it. I mean, I really did. I thought if I just worked hard enough and stayed out of the way, I could buy my own peace. But then I got sick. It wasn't a cold. It wasn't stress, which is what my mother suggested when I first told her about the lump. It was stage 3 lymphoma. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday. I remember the doctor's voice. It was kind, professional, apologetic. He used words like aggressive and immediate intervention. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for an hour, watching the rain hit the windshield, trying to figure out how to tell my parents without inconveniencing them. That's how deep the conditioning went. I was actually worried that my cancer would interrupt their plans for Tyler's engagement party. When I finally told them, the reaction wasn't tears. It wasn't a hug. It was calculation. You have to understand, they didn't look at me and see a dying daughter. They looked at me and saw a liability. My father sighed, this long, heavy exhale through his nose, and asked if I had checked my insurance deductible. My mother didn't even put down her magazine. She just frowned and mentioned that chemotherapy makes people look gaunt, and that I'd need to buy a good wig so I wouldn't ruin the wedding photos. That was the vibe. Not, we will fight this, but How do we hide this? Have you ever realized that the people supposed to protect you are actually the ones holding the door open for the wolf? Basically, the house became a prison of toxic positivity. If I complained about the pain, which felt like someone was injecting battery acid into my marrow, my mother would tell me to manifest wellness and stop being so negative. She claimed my attitude was feeding the cancer. Meanwhile, Tyler was planning the wedding of the century. He had proposed to a girl named Jessica, who was perfectly nice, but had no idea she was marrying a man whose net worth was technically zero. Tyler wanted a destination wedding. He wanted a live band. He wanted, and I am not making this up, a caviar station. And so, the money conversation started happening. I was living at home to save on rent during treatment, which meant I was front row audience to the financial gymnastics. My treatment was expensive, even with insurance, the co-pays, the specialized meds, the dietary requirements. It was bleeding my savings dry. My parents had access to a family emergency fund that my grandmother had left. It was specifically designated for health emergencies and education. It had about $60,000 in it. In my head, I thought, okay, this is what it's for. This is the rainy day. But the atmosphere in the house shifted. It got cold. I'm talking about a spiritual coldness. I would walk into the kitchen and conversation would stop abruptly. My mother started making comments about how selfish modern medicine was, how it was a scam designed to take money from hardworking families. She would look at my pill bottles on the counter with genuine disgust, like they were roaches I had brought into her clean home. And then, the symptoms started getting worse. I'm not just talking about the cancer, I'm talking about the stress. I wasn't sleeping. My hair was falling out in clumps in the shower, clogging the drain, and instead of asking if I was okay, my dad complained about the plumbing bill. I was vomiting from the chemo, and Tyler would bang on the bathroom door yelling that he was trying to stream on Twitch and my retching was messing up his audio. I tried to hold on to the good memories. I mean, honestly, I tried. I remember looking at my dad one night while he was watching TV, trying to find the man who used to take me fishing when I was 6. I tried to find the dad who untangled my line and told me I was patient, but that man was gone. He had been replaced by this hollow shell who was terrified of his wife and obsessed with his son's image. I realized then that nostalgia is a liar. It makes you think things were better than they were, just so you can endure the present. The breaking point, or the start of it, wasn't a big explosion. It was quiet. It was the smell of lavender and bleach. My mother was cleaning the kitchen, scrubbing the counters with this aggressive energy. I was sitting at the table trying to eat a cracker because it was the only thing I could keep down. She turned to me, the sponge dripping in her hand, and she didn't just speak, she performed. She put on this pained, victimized face and told me that Tyler was really struggling with the wedding costs. She said he felt less than because he couldn't give Jessica the dream wedding she deserved. And then she dropped the bomb. She didn't ask. She informed me. She said that they were looking at the finances, and my medical bills were eating everything. She suggested, no, she strongly implied, that I should pause treatment. Just for 3 months. Just until after the wedding. I remember the ringing in my ears. It was so loud it drowned out the hum of the refrigerator. I looked at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to say, I'm kidding. Obviously we choose your life over a party. But she didn't. She just kept scrubbing that damn counter, avoiding my eyes. Me talking about how I was tough and strong, and how the cancer was slow growing anyway, according to some article she read on Facebook. Basically, she was asking me to die a little bit faster so her son could have a caviar station. I didn't scream. I was too tired to scream. My body was fighting a war on a cellular level, and I didn't have the energy to fight a war in the kitchen too, so I just got up, walked to my room, and locked the door. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall, shivering not from the fever, but from the realization that I was entirely alone. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build a trap. It started with a declined card. Not a credit card at a Sephora, but my insurance card at the oncology clinic. I was sitting in the infusion chair, the one with the vinyl that always smells like rubbing alcohol and fear, waiting for the nurse to hook me up. I had my sleeves rolled up. I was ready for the poison that was saving my life. And then, the receptionist, this sweet woman named Brenda who always asks about my graphic design work, came in. She didn't have the IV bag. She had a clipboard and a look on her face that I can only describe as professional pity. She told me, very quietly, that my coverage had been terminated effective midnight yesterday, and that the outstanding balance for the last 2 sessions was now due immediately. Let's just say the room started spinning. I mean, literally spinning. The fluorescent lights overhead started to blur into these long white streaks. I tried to argue. I told her it was a mistake, that my parents handled the premiums as part of our arrangement since I was using my savings for the co-pays. I was shaking. My hands were trembling so bad I couldn't even unlock my phone to check my bank app. When I finally did, I saw the second horror. The emergency fund, the joint account my grandmother left, the one I had access to for life or death scenarios, wasn't just low. It was empty. It showed a balance of $12.43. You have to understand the physical sensation of betrayal. It's not an emotion. It's a temperature. My blood went cold. I felt the nausea rising in my throat, and it wasn't the chemo this time. I walked out of that clinic without my treatment. I walked out into the bright, blinding sunlight of the parking lot, and I felt like a ghost. I was a walking corpse because without that medicine, the clock on my life wasn't just ticking, it was sprinting. I drove home in silence. No radio, no podcast, just the sound of my tires on the pavement and the terrifying realization that I was driving back to a house that had decided I was too expensive to keep alive. When I walked through the front door, the house smelled like roasted chicken and garlic. It was so normal. It was violently normal. My parents were at the dining table. Tyler was there too, scrolling on his phone, looking bored. They were eating dinner. They were eating dinner while I had just been told I might die because of a billing error. I didn't yell. I think part of me was still in shock. I just stood there, leaning against the doorframe for support because my knees were weak, and asked them what happened to the insurance. I asked them where the money went. And here is the thing about narcissists. They don't feel guilt. They feel annoyed that you caught them. My father didn't even put down his fork. He just chewed slowly, swallowed, and then looked at me with this mild irritation, like I was interrupting his favorite show. He told me that they had to make some strategic financial decisions for the family's future. He used that word, strategic, like he was a CEO and not a man who had just gambled his daughter's life. Then my mother chimed in. And this is where the drama layer really hit me. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She looked at me with this wide-eyed, innocent expression and explained that Tyler's wedding venue required a $50,000 deposit today, or they would lose the date. The date, not a life. A date on a calendar. She said, and I am quoting the sentiment exactly because the words are burned into my brain. We couldn't let Tyler down. He's already so stressed about his image. We figured you could just wait. You're strong, Elena. You've always been the strong one. Tyler is sensitive. He needs this wedding to feel confident. We can restart your policy in a few months, after the honeymoon expenses clear. The room went dead silent. I looked at Tyler. I waited for him to jump up, to be horrified, to offer to sell his car or cancel the band, but he didn't. He just looked at me, shrugged. Aryan said that the venue was exclusive and that I shouldn't be selfish because this was his branding moment. He actually used the phrase branding moment. I looked at the table. In the center, there was a glossy brochure for the wedding package they had just bought with my blood money. It listed the amenities. And there it was, circled in gold Sharpie. Custom ice sculpture bar and premium vodka luge. They traded my chemotherapy for an ice sculpture. Honestly, in that moment, something inside me broke. But it wasn't a loud break. It was like a wire snapping in a deep ocean. The silence was absolute. I looked at my mother, the woman who used to put cool washcloths on my forehead when I had a fever as a kid. And I realized she didn't exist. That was a character she played. And the woman in front of me was a stranger who was willing to let me wither away so she could post photos of a wedding on Facebook. I felt this wave of nausea, but I swallowed it down. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. But then I looked at the brochure again. I looked at the specific itemized list. And I realized something. If I screamed, they would just gaslight me. They would call me hysterical. They would say the cancer was affecting my brain. They would kick me out, and I would die on the street. I was a hostage. Not with a gun to my head, but with a policy number. Have you ever realized that the person supposed to protect you is actually the one holding the door open for the wolf? And so, the shift happened. It was a physical sensation, like a switch flipping in the back of my skull. The sadness evaporated. One of the grief for the family I thought I had? Gone. It was replaced by this cold, hard clarity. I realized that family is just a biological coincidence. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a negotiation with terrorists. I needed to survive. And to survive, I needed to stop being their daughter and start being their executioner. I looked at my mother, and for the first time in my life, I lied to her with a smile. I forced my facial muscles to relax. I softened my eyes. I channeled every ounce of energy I had left into looking submissive. "Okay," I said. My voice was quiet. "I understand. I didn't realize it was for the venue. I can try to stretch my meds. I'll pray about it." You should have seen the relief wash over them. It was disgusting. My mother actually clapped her hands together. "See?" she said to my father. "I told you she would understand. She's a good sister." Tyler just grunted and went back to his phone. I excused myself and walked to my room. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently. I walked into my bathroom and turned on the shower so they wouldn't hear me. I sat on the cold tile floor, pulled out my phone, and opened a new note. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I started a list. Item 1, the insurance company. Item 2, the bank ledger. Item 3, the lawyer. I wasn't going to die. But their reputation was. I sat there, shivering on the bath mat, visualizing the ice sculpture melting. I imagined the water dripping down, eroding their foundation until the whole house of cards collapsed. They wanted a branding moment. I was going to give them one they would never forget. The next morning, the house was quiet. Not a peaceful quiet, but the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that happens before a storm breaks. My parents had left early to go tasting for the cake, another expense that could have paid for a month of my anti-nausea medication. Tyler was still asleep, or maybe he was awake, and just refusing to acknowledge the day before noon. It didn't matter. The house was empty enough for me to move. I woke up feeling like my veins were filled with lead. That's the thing about missing a treatment. Your body doesn't wait for you to catch up. It punishes you immediately. My joints were aching with this deep, throbbing rhythm that matched my heartbeat. But strangely, my mind was crystal clear. It was like the survival instinct had kicked into overdrive, bypassing the grief and going straight to strategy. I didn't make coffee. I didn't turn on the TV. I went straight to my car, backed out of the driveway and drove 3 blocks to the library parking lot. I needed a neutral zone. I needed to make a call that wouldn't be overheard by the thin walls of my bedroom. I sat there, staring at the dashboard, my hands shaking slightly as I dialed the insurance provider. I put the phone on speaker and hit record on my laptop. I needed a paper trail. I needed a voice. The hold music was this cheerful, upbeat jazz that felt like a mockery of my situation. Finally, a representative picked up. Her name was Sarah. "I need to clarify the termination of my policy," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't sound like the voice of a cancer patient. It sounded like a lawyer. "I was told it was canceled due to non-payment, but I need the specific authorization record. Who called to cancel it?" There was a pause. I could hear her typing. Click, click, click. "One moment, ma'am," she said. "Okay, here it is. The policy was not canceled for non-payment. It was a voluntary termination requested by the primary policyholder." "And the reason given?" I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it. "Financial hardship," she read. The note says, "Family restructuring of assets due to insolvency." I closed my eyes. Insolvency. They claimed they were bankrupt to save money on my life, while simultaneously writing checks for a wedding that cost more than most people make in a year. "Can you send me the transcript of that authorization?" I asked. "I can email you the confirmation notice," she said. 5 minutes later, it pinged on my phone. So I opened the PDF. There it was, in black and white. Policy number 884-290-X terminated. Reason: financial hardship. Authorized by Mother. Date: October 14th. I stared at the screen. October 14th. That was 3 days ago. That was the day I came home vomiting from chemo, and my mother had made me soup and told me everything was going to be okay. She had looked me in the eye, smoothed my hair back, and lied to my face while the cancellation order was already processing in the system. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the feeling of the umbilical cord finally being cut. Not by nature, but by a signature on a digital form. I drove back to the house. The driveway was still empty. Tyler's car was there, but he never woke up before 1 p.m. I had a window. I walked into the house and went straight to my father's office. It was a shrine to mediocrity. Fake leather books, framed certificates of participation for charity golf tournaments, and a massive mahogany desk that cost more than my first car. The computer was asleep. I tapped the spacebar and the screen lit up, demanding a password. "You have to understand, my father isn't a cybersecurity expert. He's a man of habit. And his habit is worshipping his son." I tried the obvious first. "Tyler wins." Incorrect. "Tyler, CEO." Incorrect. I paused. I looked around the room. On the wall, there was a framed photo of Tyler at his high school graduation, looking smug. The date was June 12th. Tyler, 0612. Access. Granted. The desktop flickered to life. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I could hear the floorboards creaking upstairs, Tyler moving around. I had maybe 10 minutes before he came down for food. I didn't waste time. I went straight to the family finance folder. My father was meticulous about tracking his empire, even if that empire was currently crumbling. I opened the spreadsheet labeled 2025_expenses. I scrolled past the mortgage, the utilities, the car payments, and then I saw it. The medical savings column. It was a long list of withdrawals, but they weren't for the pharmacy. They weren't for the clinic. I opened the bank's website. He had the password saved in the browser naturally, and pulled up the transaction history for the joint account, the one my grandmother had set up, the one that was supposed to save me. I scrolled down to October 12th, 2 days before the insurance cancellation. There was a transfer, a massive singular hemorrhage of funds. I took a screenshot, then I printed it. I held the paper in my hands, the ink still warm. It read, Wire transfer confirmed. Amount $52,000 from savings. Account ending in 9090. 2. Lux Weddings and Events, LLC, memo. Venue deposit plus platinum ice package. $52,000. I looked at the number. I did the math in my head. My last round of immunotherapy was $12,000. My next scan was $4,000. They had literally taken 4 months of my life and converted it into a deposit for a room where people would drink overpriced champagne and pretend to like each other. But I wasn't done. I needed to know exactly what the platinum ice package was. I mean, for 50 grand, I wanted to see the itemized list of my murder weapon. I searched his email for Lux Weddings. The contract popped up. I opened the attachment. It was a PDF brochure with the selected items checked off in bright blue digital ink. I read down the list. Grand ballroom rental, $25,000. Floral archway, imported orchids, $8,000. Custom ice sculpture bar, 12 feet, $5,500. Live swan rental for lake, $2,000. I stopped reading. Live swans. They rented live birds. I sat back in my father's leather chair. The room was silent, save for the hum of the computer fan. I felt light. That's the only word for it. The heavy, crushing weight of confusion was gone. The guilt of being a burden was gone. Because I wasn't a burden. I was a financier. I was the involuntary investor in Tyler's ego. I looked at the screen, and for a second, I saw my reflection in the dark glass. I looked tired. My skin was pale. My eyes had dark circles. But there was something else there, too. A hardness. A steel that hadn't been there yesterday. Suddenly I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy. Fast. Tyler. My heart seized. I minimized the windows, cleared the history, and stood up just as the door handle turned. Tyler walked in, wearing boxers and a t-shirt that said "Genius at Work." He was rubbing his eyes, holding a bowl of cereal. He stopped when he saw me. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. He didn't sound suspicious, just annoyed that I was in his territory. I forced a smile. It was tight, painful, but convincing. "Just looking for a stapler," I said. "Mom asked me to organize some receipts for the wedding. She wants everything perfect." Tyler snorted, shoveling a spoonful of cereal into his mouth. "Yeah, well, make sure you don't mess up Dad's desk. He's stressed enough about the bills without you moving his stuff." He turned and walked out, leaving the door open. I stood there for a full minute, listening to the crunch of his cereal as he walked down the hall. He had no idea. He was eating his breakfast, thinking about his big day, completely unaware that the sister he just dismissed was currently holding the detonator to his entire life in her pocket. I looked down at the printed transfer receipt in my hand. I folded it carefully into a tiny square. Then I slipped it into my bra, right next to the port that was supposed to deliver my medicine. I walked out of the office. I didn't feel sick anymore. I felt ready. Have you ever realized that the moment you stop hoping for them to love you is the moment you become dangerous? I drove to a strip mall on the south side of town, the kind with a vape shop on one end and a payday loan center on the other. Sandwiched in the middle was the office of Saul the Hammer Verdugo. His face was on every bus bench in the county, usually accompanied by a slogan like "Injured, get paid," or "Make them pay." He wasn't the type of lawyer you hired to draft a will. He was the type you hired when you wanted to scorch the earth. I walked in. The waiting room smelled like stale coffee and desperation. I didn't have an appointment, but when I told the receptionist, a woman with acrylic nails so long she had to type with the pads of her fingers, that I had proof of a $50,000 theft from a medical trust, she got me in immediately. Sitting across from Verdugo was an experience. He was a small man, wearing a suit that was slightly too shiny, and he listened to me with the intensity of a shark smelling blood in the water. I laid it all out. The grandmother's trust fund documents, which, thankfully, I had kept a copy of in my email, the bank transfer receipt I'd stolen from my father's desk, and the audio recording of the insurance cancellation. I watched his face change. He went from bored personal injury attorney to predator. He looked at the documents, then at me. He didn't offer me a tissue for the cancer story. He offered me a strategy. He explained in this fast, clipped voice that what my parents had done wasn't just mean. It was conversion of funds and elder/dependent adult financial abuse, given my medical condition. He told me that since the money was specifically designated for my health in the trust, spending it on a party was effectively theft. And here's the thing about sharks. They know exactly where to bite. He said we couldn't just sue them. That would take months. We needed an emergency injunction. He called it a prejudgment writ of attachment. Basically, because the money was already spent on tangible goods, the venue, the catering, the ice sculpture, we could petition the court to seize those assets to satisfy the debt immediately, especially since there was a risk of flight or further dissipation of assets. I signed the paperwork. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. I authorized him to file the motion ex parte, meaning my parents wouldn't know until the sheriff showed up to serve the papers. "We'll serve them at the house," he suggested. "No," I said. And this was the moment I truly crossed the line. Serve them at the venue. During the reception. They're spending my life savings on that party. I want the party to pay me back. Verdugo actually smiled. It was a terrifying expression. He tapped his pen on the desk and said he'd have the sheriff and a seizure team ready for Saturday night. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in years. I had just initiated the legal destruction of my family, and all I could think about was getting a burger. But the hardest part wasn't the law. It was the acting. I had to go back to that house. I had to live in the belly of the beast for 3 more days without cracking. I had to put on the mask. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was buzzing. It was 48 hours until the wedding. My mother was in the living room, surrounded by mountains of tulle and favors. Tyler was on the couch, mental prepping for his big day, which apparently involved playing FIFA at maximum volume. I walked in, and my mother looked up, flustered. She started rambling about how the seating chart was a disaster, and how Jessica's aunt was allergic to gluten and she didn't know what to do. I didn't snap. I didn't yell. I took a deep breath, channeled every ounce of strength I had left, and smiled. "I can help, Mom," I said. "Let me handle the favors. You sit down." She looked at me like I was an angel. "Oh, Elena, you're such a good sister. I knew you'd come around. I knew you understood." Honestly, the praise felt like acid. She was praising my submission. She was praising the fact that I was making it easy for them to kill me. For the next 2 days, I was the perfect daughter. I folded hundreds of napkins. I listened to Jessica complain about how the swans might bite the guests. I even helped Tyler write his vows because he couldn't think of anything to say to his future wife other than, "You're hot." But the mask is heavy. You have to understand, pretending to love people who are actively harming you is physically exhausting. My bones ached. I was skipping doses of my pain meds to save them for the event, so I was operating on a baseline of agony that made the edges of my vision blur. And yet, I needed to be sure. I needed the last chance. It was the night before the wedding. The rehearsal dinner had just finished. Pizza at the house because funds were tight. Ironic. The kitchen was quiet. My mom was loading the dishwasher. I stood by the counter holding a glass of water. My hand was trembling, just a little. "Mom," I said softly. And she hummed in response, not turning around. "Are you sure? Are you sure there's no way we can pay for the treatment before next month? The doctor said waiting is dangerous. I'm really scared, Mom. This was it. The off-ramp. If she turned around right now, hugged me, and said, "My God, what are we doing? We'll cancel the band. We'll sell the car. We'll save you." Then I would call Verdugo. I would call off the sheriff. I would forgive them. She stopped loading the dishwasher. She stood there for a second, her back to me. Then she sighed. That same heavy martyr sigh she always used. She turned around, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She didn't look worried. She looked annoyed. "Elena, honey," she said, her voice dripping with that fake, condescending sweetness. "We've been over this. The money is tied up. It's an investment in your brother's future. Once he's married and settled, he'll help us all. You just need to have a little faith. Stop being so dramatic. It's only a few weeks." Tied up. Investment. Dramatic. She looked me dead in the eye and lied. She didn't just lie about the money, she lied about caring. She was gambling my life on the hope that Tyler would magically become a provider, despite 30 years of evidence to the contrary. That lie was the final nail in the coffin. "Okay," I said. My voice was dead flat. "I understand. I won't ask again." "Good," she said, turning back to the sink. "Now get some sleep. You need to look healthy for the photos tomorrow." I walked away. I didn't go to sleep. I went to my room, locked the door, and texted Verdugo. Message: "They are all yours. Execute on schedule." I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent. Down the hall, my parents were sleeping soundly, dreaming of their perfect party. Tyler was probably dreaming of himself. I wasn't dreaming. I was counting down the hours. They wanted a show? They were going to get the most expensive show of their lives. The reception hall was freezing. I mean, bone-chillingly cold. It wasn't just the industrial air conditioning blasting to keep the flowers fresh. It was the sheer amount of ice in the room. Walking into the ballroom felt like walking into a mausoleum designed by a Pinterest algorithm. Everything was white. White tablecloths, white lilies, white Chiavari chairs, and of course, the pièce de résistance, the custom 12-foot ice bar. I stood near the entrance adjusting the expensive wig my mother had insisted I buy so I wouldn't ruin the aesthetic with my thinning hair. It was itchy, and the glue was digging into my scalp, but I didn't scratch. I just stood there in my pale blue bridesmaid dress, which hung off my frame because I'd lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks, and watched the guests marvel at the spectacle. "Oh my God! Look at the swans!" One of Jessica's cousins squealed, pointing at the sculpture. "They're actually pouring vodka through the wings." I watched as a bartender poured Grey Goose into a channel carved into the ice. It spiraled down through the frozen neck of the swan and into a waiting shot glass. The guest threw it back, laughing. Let's just say, it was a surreal experience to watch strangers get drunk on my chemotherapy. Every drop of vodka that slid down that ice was a milligram of medication I wasn't taking. Every flower arrangement on the tables was a doctor's appointment I had missed. The room didn't smell like lilies to me. It smelled like theft. My mother floated by, looking radiant in a silver gown that probably cost more than my car. She spotted me and immediately swooped in her face arranging itself into a mask of concerned maternal love because she knew people were watching. "Elena, sweetie," she whispered, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. "You look pale. Put some lipstick on, you're fading into the background." "I'm supposed to fade, remember?" I said, my voice quiet. "This is Tyler's day." She didn't catch the sarcasm. She just nodded, satisfied. "Exactly. Don't draw attention. Just smile and sit down." I walked to my table. It was in the back, near the kitchen doors. Classic. The family table was front and center. But I had been relegated to table 19 with the distant relatives and the wedding photographer's assistant. It was perfect, actually. It gave me a clear line of sight to the double doors at the main entrance. The doors where reckoning would arrive. I sat down and checked my phone under the table. Message from Verdugo. Sheriff is en route, ETA 10 minutes. Hold tight. I put the phone away and took a sip of water. My hands were cold. The adrenaline was the only thing keeping me upright. I looked around the room. 300 people. Friends, family, business partners my dad was trying to impress. They were all eating the sea bass, oblivious to the fact that the check for this meal was going to bounce so hard it would crack the foundation of the venue. And then, the speeches began. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the head table. The band played a fanfare. Tyler stood up. You have to understand the level of arrogance my brother possesses. He didn't just stand, he rose. He held the microphone like it was a scepter. He was wearing a custom tuxedo, another $2,000 from my medical fund, and he looked triumphant. He didn't look like a thief, he looked like a king. He tapped the mic. Thump. Thump. Wow, he said, looking out at the crowd. Just, wow, look at this room. Look at what we built. The crowd applauded. My parents beamed, clutching each other's hands like proud architects of this fraud. You know, Tyler continued, his voice dropping to that fake, humble register he used when he wanted money. A lot of people said we couldn't pull this off. They said the vision was too big. They said the timeline was too tight. But I've always believed that if you want something bad enough, the universe provides. I almost laughed out loud. The universe? No, Tyler. Your dying sister provided. He walked around the table, working the room. Building a life takes sacrifice, he said, nodding solemnly. It takes grit. It takes the willingness to do whatever is necessary to secure the future. And I have worked so hard this past year to make sure Jessica got the fairy tale she deserved. I gripped the tablecloth. My knuckles turned white. He worked hard? He hadn't worked a day in 6 months. He had spent the last year playing video games and yelling at our mom to bring him snacks while I worked double shifts at the design firm before my diagnosis. But he wasn't done. He turned his gaze toward the back of the room, toward table 19. And I want to thank my family, he said. The spotlight swung around, blinding me for a second. Especially my sister Elena. She's going through a little rough patch with her health right now. A murmur of sympathy went through the crowd. A little rough patch. Stage 3. Lymphoma. But, Tyler said, his voice swelling with pride, even in her struggle, she stepped up. She knew how much this meant to me. She made sacrifices so we could be here tonight. She gave a lot. And that's what family is, right? Supporting the ones with the biggest dreams. He raised his glass. To family. And to the hustle. To the hustle, the crowd roared back. My mother was dabbing her eyes with a napkin, looking at me with this beatific smile, as if she was thinking, see? He acknowledged you. Aren't you grateful? I sat there, frozen in the spotlight. The audacity was physically painful. He wasn't just stealing my money, he was stealing the narrative. He was turning his theft into my gift. He was publicly rewriting the story so that if I complained later, I would look like a bitter Indian giver. She made sacrifices so we could be here. He had no idea. I looked at my watch. It was 8:15 p.m. The applause died down. Tyler sat, looking smug. The waiters began circulating with champagne for the toast. The room was buzzing with the clink-clink of expensive crystal. It was the sound of success. It was the sound of a perfect, seamless lie. And then, I saw it. Through the gap in the crowd, past the ice sculpture that was weeping water onto the floor, the double doors at the back of the hall didn't just open. They were pushed open with force. The music didn't stop immediately, The string quartet kept playing Vivaldi, but the ripple started at the back of the room. Heads turned. Smiles faltered. The air in the room shifted from celebration to confusion in a heartbeat. 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies walked in. Behind them was a man in a cheap suit holding a clipboard, my lawyer's process server, and behind him were 4 men in work jumpsuits carrying dollies and packing blankets. My mother saw them first. I watched the color drain from her face in real time. It was like watching a candle get snuffed out. She dropped her fork. It clattered onto her china plate, a sharp, dissonant sound that cut through the music. Tyler was still laughing at something Jessica whispered, completely oblivious that his hustle had just walked through the door with a warrant. I picked up my glass of water. I didn't drink. I just held it, feeling the condensation cool my palm. The tension in the room was a physical thing. A rubber band pulled so tight it was screaming, and then the music stopped. The silence that followed the music wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of vacuum that happens right before a car crash, where your brain registers the danger but your body hasn't had time to scream yet. The string quartet lowered their bows, looking confused. The guests at the tables near the door were already whispering, their heads swiveling between the uniformed officers and the head table. My father stood up first. He knocked over his champagne flute. It shattered, the crystal exploding on the dance floor with a sound like a gunshot. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice cracking. He tried to project authority, but he just sounded like a frightened old man. The process server, a guy with a bad haircut and absolutely zero patience, didn't even look at him. He walked straight to the center of the dance floor, on his shoes squeaking on the polished wood. He held up a thick packet of documents stamped with the county seal. "Is there a Tyler and Jessica, last name, present?" he asked, his voice booming without a microphone. Tyler, still holding his microphone, laughed nervously. "This is a prank, right? Did the groomsmen set this up? Is this a stripper thing?" The sheriff's deputy stepped forward, resting his hand on his belt. "This is a pre-judgment writ of attachment and seizure, ordered by the Superior Court. Case number 24, CIV-099. We are here to secure assets purchased with misappropriated trust funds." The room went dead silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. You could hear the ice sculpture dripping. Drip, drip. "Misappropriated?" my mother squeaked. She looked like she was going to faint. That's a misunderstanding. We can clear this up on Monday, please. This is a wedding." "The court order is immediate, ma'am," the server said, not unkindly, but firmly. He gestured to the movers behind him. "We have a warrant to seize all movable property and vendor services paid for by the grandmother's name medical trust, up to the value of $52,000. That includes the catering deposits, the floral arrangements, the rental equipment, and the alcohol inventory." He pointed to the bar. "Start with the top shelf." Chaos didn't erupt all at once. It trickled in, like water through a dam. First, the movers marched past the stunned guests and started loading cases of Grey Goose and Dom Perignon onto hand trucks. The clinking of bottles was deafening in the silent room. Then, the venue manager ran out from the kitchen, waving his arms. When the process server handed him a copy of the court order, I saw the manager's face go from red to white as he read the words, "constructive fraud" and "receipt of stolen funds." He looked at my father, then at the movers. He didn't stop them. He signaled his staff to stop serving. The waiters froze. Trays of filet mignon were lowered to stands. The open bar was closed. The lights were brought up to full brightness, killing the mood instantly. And then, the crowd understood. "Medical trust?" I heard a woman at the next table whisper. "Did he say medical trust?" "That's Elena's money," someone else said. "The cancer money." The whisper spread like a virus. Cancer money. Stolen. Fraud. I watched Tyler. He was standing there, the microphone limp in his hand, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He looked at Jessica. Jessica was staring at him with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. She wasn't looking at the sheriff. She was looking at the man she had just married, realizing that the empire he claimed to build was actually a pyramid scheme built on his sister's grave. "Tyler," she whispered. The microphone picked it up. It echoed through the hall. "Tyler, did you steal her chemo money?" Tyler panicked. The arrogance from his speech evaporated. He looked like a cornered rat. "No. No, babe, it's not like that. It was a loan. We were going to pay it back. Mom said it was fine. Mom said Elena didn't need it right now." He pointed at our mother. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls. "I never—" "Tyler, don't you dare put this on me." "You told me she was in remission," Tyler screamed, his voice cracking. "You said she was fine." And there it was. In the implosion, the public saint mask crumbled, revealing the ugly, rotting truth underneath. They turned on each other instantly. My father was shouting at the process server. My mother was shouting at Tyler. Tyler was shouting at Jessica. And the movers? They kept working. They were ruthlessly efficient. They rolled up the custom aisle runner. They started taking the floral centerpieces off the tables while guests were still sitting there. Then, they got to the ice sculpture. Two burly men approached the 12-foot masterpiece, the platinum ice package, the thing that had cost 3 months of my life. "Careful," one of them grunted. "It's slippery." They wrapped a heavy moving blanket around the base. They didn't treat it like art. They treated it like cargo. They tipped it onto a dolly. The swans wobbled. In a chunk of ice, one of the majestic wings snapped off and crashed onto the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Crash. The sound made my mother scream. "Stop! You're ruining it! You're ruining everything!" The deputy stepped between her and the movers. "Ma'am, step back, or you will be cited for obstruction." She froze. She looked around the room, desperate for an ally. She looked at her friends, her neighbors, her church group. But nobody was looking at her with sympathy anymore. They were looking at her with disgust. They were looking at a woman who wore a $4,000 dress while her daughter sat in the back with a wig covering her chemo hair. Finally, her eyes found me. I was still sitting at table 19. I hadn't moved. I hadn't spoken. I was just watching, my hands folded in my lap. She stormed over to me, her heels clicking on the hardwood. Her face was twisted into a snarl I had never seen before. It was the face of the monster she had kept hidden for 20 years. "You!" she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You did this. You ungrateful, selfish little bitch. You called them. How could you? This is your brother's wedding." The room went silent again. Everyone wanted to hear the answer. Even the movers paused. Tyler ran over, tears streaming down his face, ruining his spray tan. "Why?" he wailed. "Why couldn't you just wait? I would have paid you back. I'm good for it." I looked at them. I looked at the parents who raised me to be a spare part. I looked at the brother who thought he was the main character. I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I picked up my purse and smoothed down my dress. I looked Tyler dead in the eye. "You said in your speech that I made a sacrifice for this family," I said. My voice was calm, carrying perfectly in the dead, silent room. "You were right. I did." I pulled the wig off my head. The gasps were audible. My scalp was patchy, raw, and undeniably sick. I dropped the expensive blonde wig onto the table, right next to the half-eaten bread rolls. "I'm just here to collect my receipt," I said. I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Jessica throwing her bouquet on the floor. I heard my father trying to explain tax law to a sheriff who didn't care. I heard the sound of the ice sculpture being wheeled out the door, dripping a trail of water that looked like tears. I walked out into the cool night air. The valet brought my car around. It was a 2015 Honda, dented and old. It wasn't a limo. But as I drove away, watching the red and blue lights of the police cars reflecting in my rearview mirror, I realized something. It was the most beautiful car in the world. The fallout wasn't a singular explosion. It was a slow, agonizing crumble. It was the architectural collapse of a life built entirely on load-bearing lies. In the days after the wedding, the video of the seizure went viral. Not national news viral, but local Facebook group viral, which is honestly worse. In our town, reputation is currency, and my parents were suddenly bankrupt. The clip of the ice swan shattering on the floor became a meme in the community. People didn't see a tragedy. They saw karma in high definition. Jessica filed for an annulment 48 hours later. She cited fraud in the inducement, which is legal speak for, "I thought he was rich, but he's actually an unemployed man-child whose parents stole from a cancer patient." She didn't just leave him, she scorched the earth. She took the ring, which, it turned out, Ian was bought on a credit card in my father's name, and pawned it to pay for her own lawyer. Tyler didn't handle it well. The golden child narrative requires an audience, and suddenly, his audience was gone. He tried to spin it on social media, posting these long, rambling videos about betrayal and toxic family dynamics, trying to paint me as the villain who ruined his love story. But the internet is a cruel place. The comment section wasn't sympathetic. It was a firing squad. Strangers were posting screenshots of the court documents Verdugo had filed, highlighting the medical trust misappropriation clause. Tyler eventually deleted his accounts. He retreated into the basement of the house, but he wouldn't be there for long. The lawsuit was brutal. Verdugo didn't just want the 52 grand back. He wanted punitive damages. He argued that the emotional distress and the delay in my treatment constituted intentional infliction of emotional harm. The judge agreed. To pay the judgment, my parents had to sell the house. I remember driving by the day the for sale sign went up. It was a rainy Tuesday. The house, which had always been my mother's pride and joy, her stage for all those perfect family dinners where I was ignored, looked small. It looked tired. The landscaping was overgrown because they couldn't afford the gardener anymore. I watched from my car as my father loaded boxes into a rented U-Haul. He wasn't wearing his suits anymore. He was wearing sweatpants that sagged at the knees. He looked 20 years older. He moved with this heavy, shuffling gait, like the gravity of his choices was finally crushing his spine. My mother was standing on the porch, she holding a lamp, just staring at the neighborhood that had excommunicated her. She didn't look like the public saint anymore. She looked like a ghost haunting her own ruins. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex near the highway. It's the kind of place where you can hear the neighbors arguing through the walls and the smell of old carpet never quite leaves. Tyler went with them. He's 32, sleeping on a pull-out couch in his parents' living room, surrounded by boxes of unsold wedding favors. I didn't visit. I blocked their numbers the night of the wedding. My phone used to ring 10 times a day, texts from my mom demanding errands, calls from Tyler demanding money. Now, it's quiet. But let's talk about the real victory. 3 months after the red wedding, as I like to call it, I got a scan. And the treatment I paid for with the settlement money, the money that was ripped out of the ice sculpture and put back into my veins, worked. Remission. The doctor said the word, and I didn't cry. I just nodded. It felt like a business transaction. I had traded my family for my life, and the deal had finally closed. I used the rest of the settlement to put a down payment on a small cottage about 20 minutes out of town. It's not a mansion. It doesn't have a grand ballroom or marble floors. It has creaky wood floors and a kitchen that smells like lemon oil and fresh bread. Tonight, I am sitting on my back porch. It's late autumn. The air is crisp, smelling of wood smoke and damp leaves. I have a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. My hair is growing back, a soft fuzz that I don't cover with a wig anymore. I am holding a glass of water. Just tap water, cold, clean. I look out at the yard. There are no swans here. There are no flashing lights. There is no applause. There is just the wind moving through the trees and the sound of a distant owl. I think about my mother, probably sitting in that cramped apartment, blaming the world for her misfortune. I think about Tyler, blaming me for his failure. I think about the ice sculpture, melting on the floor of the country club, turning into nothing but a puddle of expensive water. And then I take a sip. The water tastes like iron and earth. It tastes real. I am alone. I am an orphan by choice. I have no parents to call, no brother to save, no legacy to uphold. And honestly, it is the most peaceful feeling in the world.